Indeed, you recently commented, Mr. President, that if it were not for the United States, European countries would be speaking German. Dare I say that if it wasn't for us, you'd be speaking French.
Donald Trump just had one of the most embarrassing nights of his entire presidency. And it happened inside his own house at his own dinner in front of his own cabinet, with the King of England sitting right next to him the whole time. King Charles came to Washington, gave a speech before a joint session of Congress that had Democrats standing and clapping. People who will not clap for anything were on their feet for a foreign monarch. Then Charles walked into the White House for a state dinner and somehow made Trump look like a man who wandered into the wrong event and decided to just stay anyway. Trump tried. He stood up at that podium probably thinking he was going to match the king's energy, land a few jokes, and walk away looking like the gracious, powerful host. None of that happened. Not one part of it. You want to know how far off the rails this evening went? Trump interrupted his own state dinner speech to congratulate a golfer. That is not an exaggeration. We are going to get to every single moment tonight because there are a lot of them, and every one of them adds to the same picture. King Charles spent the earlier part of the day at Congress delivering a speech that was careful, loaded, and aimed directly at this administration without ever once saying Trump's name. He talked about checks on executive power, standing ovation. NATO and Ukraine, standing ovation. The international rules-based order being under threat. The room understood exactly who he meant. Democrats, who spend every waking moment opposing this White House, were applauding a British king because what he was saying resonated more than anything coming out of the Oval Office right now. And then he walked into the White House for dinner. Trump's turf, Trump's event, Trump's house. And even there, Charles was the more composed, more controlled, more commanding presence in the room. Trump felt it the entire evening and said so out loud at the dinner, which we will get to. Here's the first moment. Trump at the podium going for charm and wit, pulling out his Windsor Castle story.
And I looked down as a former real estate person, and it just went on forever. And it was built by a gentleman named William the Conqueror in the year 1070. And I asked the king, I said, was he a nice man, William the Conqueror? He said, I tend to doubt it. I don't think so. When they call you William the Conqueror, generally speaking, you're not going to be too nice, but he must have been something.
So Trump is standing at a state dinner with the King of England sitting right there, and his big contribution is asking whether William the Conqueror was a nice guy. That is the material he brought. A man who reshaped the entire political and cultural landscape of medieval Europe, whose military campaign in 1066 changed the English language itself, changed the legal system, changed everything about how Britain functioned. And Trump's big takeaway from Windsor Castle is, was he nice, though? Was William a pleasant fellow? That is where Trump landed after visiting one of the most historically significant royal residences on the planet. And the room went quiet. Charles is sitting there with that expression that people who have spent their entire lives in formal settings learn to wear when something is not going well, and they have committed to riding it out gracefully. Trump also said, as a former real estate person, it just went on forever. Windsor Castle, one of the most storied structures in all of European history. Built to withstand sieges, it survived fires, wars, and centuries of political upheaval. Trump looked at it and thought, long building. That is the observation. It went on for a while. Now, here is where the evening takes a genuinely strange turn.
From the trenches of World War I to the beaches of Normandy, from the frozen hills of Korea to the scorching sands of North Africa and the Middle East. And we're doing a little Middle East work right now, two of you might know, and we're doing very well. We have militarily defeated that particular opponent, and we're never going to let that opponent ever, Charles agrees with me, even more than I do, we're never going to let that opponent have a nuclear weapon. They know that, and they've known.
Iran is militarily defeated. That is what Trump just announced at a state dinner with the King of England sitting next to him, mid-speech, off script. This is not true. There were strikes. There were negotiations. There is an ongoing, complicated situation with no clean resolution and no military surrender from any party. But Trump stands up at a formal dinner, cameras rolling, diplomats in the room, and just calls it. Defeated, done, wrapped up, moving on to the next thing. And then Charles agrees with me even more than I do. Someone needs to explain that sentence. Charles agrees with Trump more than Trump agrees with himself. That is not a grammatically functional thought. That is not how agreement operates between two people. But it is now out there, recorded, witnessed, and permanently attached to this evening. And look at Charles during this, still composed, not reacting, because that is what you do when you have spent 70 years preparing to be in rooms exactly like this one. You just sit there, you let it happen. You do not give it anything to bounce off of.
I also want to, before we really begin, I want to congratulate Charles on having made a fantastic speech today at Congress. He got the Democrats to stand. I've never been able to do that. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. They liked him more than they've ever liked any Republican or Democrat, actually. So I just want to thank you and congratulations. It's not an easy thing to do. That's a tough place.
Trump just stood at his own state dinner and admitted out loud to the King of England that Charles got Democrats to stand for him, and Trump never has. Think about what that confession means coming from this particular person. Trump measures everything by crowd response, by applause, by who the room likes more. It is the metric he has used his entire public life. And he watched King Charles walk into Congress, spend one afternoon on Capitol Hill, and walk out with standing ovations from people who have resisted clapping for anything Trump has done across 2 terms. And instead of just not mentioning it, Trump brings it up at dinner and tells the king directly, "You did something I have never been able to do." I could not believe it. He says it twice, like he is still sitting with it, still processing it hours later. The king came to his country, walked into his Congress, and connected with his people better than he ever has. And Trump announced this information voluntarily at a state dinner. That is not a compliment. That is a man who cannot stop thinking about the thing that bothered him most that day, and eventually just says it out loud because he cannot hold it in anymore.
This unstoppable daring, this unconquerable courage, it really is. It's unconquerable. And speaking of that, where's Rory McIlroy? Can stand up, Rory, will you please? That was unconquerable courage. That was very good, Rory. I don't know if that helps them talk about how wonderful the speech, but I had to interrupt my speech because I watched that man win a tournament. That was a tough one. Congratulations. Very proud of you.
He stopped his speech mid-sentence to find Rory McIlroy in the audience at a state dinner with the King of England. Trump stops his prepared remarks about World War soldiers and unconquerable courage and Normandy and Korea to make a golfer stand up because he watched him win a tournament. I had to interrupt my speech because I watched that man win a tournament. And he says it like it is a completely reasonable thing to do. Like this is just standard dinner behavior. You are in the middle of honoring the shared military history of 2 allied nations across a century of conflict, and you pause everything because Rory McIlroy is in the room and the Masters just happened. All right, now I will get back to my speech. Okay, the King of England is sitting next to you. There are cameras from multiple countries in that room. There are diplomats and officials and members of both governments present. And Trump goes, okay. Like he just got distracted at a backyard barbecue and is finding his place again on a napkin. Rory just stood there. Because what do? You stand. You nod. You sit back down. You tell this story for the rest of your life at every dinner party you ever attend.
Today, most of Britain's former colonies have no idea what they truly owe to this towering legacy of law, liberty, and British custom that they were given. We were given that, and it was a great
British colonialism was a gift. That is the framing Trump just put on the table. Most of Britain's former colonies have no idea what they truly owe. It was given to them. It was a great, great gift. There is no diplomatic packaging that makes that sentence land differently than it sounds. There is no context you can add around it that softens what was just said. Dozens of nations spent generations fighting for independence from that exact legacy. Entire economies were restructured around resisting it. Cultural identities were suppressed under it. And Trump is standing at a dinner with the king of that former empire, calling it a gift the recipients should appreciate more. Charles has spent years carefully navigating this exact conversation. He has acknowledged pain and complexity in Britain's colonial history. He understands what that legacy means to the countries and the people it touched. And he had to sit there while the American president told the room that the colonies should be saying thank you. The room heard it. Everyone heard it. And nobody said anything because sometimes the most devastating response to something is just silence. He forgot Melania at a toast at a state dinner for the King and Queen of England, with cameras from multiple countries in the room, and did not mention his own wife, who was sitting there at the same dinner. The toast at a state dinner is one of the most rehearsed, most scripted moments of the entire evening. There are people whose entire professional purpose is to make sure the toast goes correctly. Someone wrote it. Someone reviewed it. Someone probably went over it with Trump before the dinner started. And Melania still did not make it in. The awkwardness in that room is something you can feel through a screen. Everyone noticed. The cameras noticed. And nobody said a word, because what do you say when the president forgets his wife exists during a toast to the King and Queen of England, sitting 3 feet away from her? And then Queen Camilla's outside working the receiving line, doing exactly what a visiting dignitary is supposed to do. Being warm, being present, shaking hands with members of Trump's own cabinet, his people, the people who work for him. And Trump cuts in, physically moves in front of the Queen of England to shake hands with his own cabinet members, people he sees every single day, people who walk into his meetings, people who work in his building. He saw Camilla getting warmth from his own staff, and something in him just could not let that continue. So he stepped in mid-handshake in front of every camera in that courtyard. Camilla stops. Just stops. And you can see the exact moment it registers. Did he actually? Yes, he did. Why would Trump need those handshakes? Those are his people. He can shake their hands any Tuesday morning he wants. But in that specific moment, with cameras rolling and the Queen of England working the room, Trump decided those handshakes belonged to him. There is something genuinely revealing about that moment that goes beyond just being awkward or rude, though it was absolutely both of those things. Trump could not stand watching someone else be the center of attention in a space he believes is entirely his. Camilla was getting the warmth. His cabinet was responding to her, and he stepped in to reclaim it. That is the whole evening right there in one image. A president who could not let anyone else have the room even for 30 seconds. Not even a queen. Not even at his own dinner. Not even with the King of England watching from inside. Now let us talk about what this whole night actually means, because there is a bigger picture here that I think gets lost when you are just reacting to each individual moment. King Charles did not come to Washington to embarrass Donald Trump. That is not what happened. Charles came with a purpose, delivered it at Congress in the morning, and then showed up to dinner and continued to be exactly who he is, composed, deliberate, careful with every word. But the contrast with Trump was so stark and so visible that embarrassment became the natural byproduct of the two of them being in the same room. Charles spent his speech at Congress threading needles that Trump does not even see. He praised the U.S. and UK alliance while simultaneously referencing NATO, Ukraine, and the international rules-based order, all three things that this administration has either attacked or undermined in the past year. He cited the Magna Carta and the principle that executive power is subject to checks and balances, in front of a Congress where many members have watched this administration test exactly those limits. He said America's words carry weight and meaning directly to a joint session, while Trump was presumably watching somewhere. And Democrats stood because Charles was saying things they agree with, because Charles was threading a message through the formality of a state visit that landed exactly where he intended it to land. That is not an accident. That is decades of preparation for rooms like that one. Then he comes to dinner and Trump tries to match that energy with a William the Conqueror anecdote, with a real estate observation about a long building, with an off-script announcement that Iran is done, with a golf tournament shout-out, with a toast that forgot his wife. Every single one of those moments is its own thing. But together they build a picture of a man who felt outmatched from the moment Charles landed in Washington and spent the entire day trying to find his footing. He never quite got there. The Rory McIlroy thing. I keep coming back to that one because it is not just that it was random or undignified or strange. It is that Trump framed it as courage. He used the word unconquerable courage to describe soldiers at Normandy and then used that same phrase in the same breath to introduce a golfer winning a tournament. That is Trump genuinely not registering the difference between those two things in that moment. The speech about sacrifice and war and shared military history just became a backdrop for a golf shout-out because Rory was in the room and Trump wanted to be the one to acknowledge him. And the colonies line, that one is going to follow this evening for a while because there are people watching this dinner from countries that were part of that colonial history. There are governments and leaders and citizens who experienced what British rule actually meant on the ground, not in the abstract framing of law and liberty and British custom, but in what it cost the people who lived under it. And the American president told them it was a gift they should appreciate. Charles could not agree with that framing even if he wanted to. He has spent years doing the opposite, and he had to sit there while Trump said it at his dinner. The toast without Melania is almost the perfect ending to the evening, except it was not the ending because then Camilla got cut off in the receiving line. Each moment just kept coming one after another, each one landing in the same place. Trump has built his entire public identity around the idea that he wins every room he enters, that he is the most commanding presence, that people respond to him, defer to him, move toward him. And King Charles walked into his house, sat at his table, accepted his hospitality, and the room responded to Charles. Not because Charles was trying to beat Trump, but because Charles simply is what he is. And what Trump is was visible in every one of those moments. The awkward Windsor Castle bit, the Iran announcement nobody confirmed, the golf interruption, the colonial gift comment, the forgotten wife, the handshake grab. This was Trump's night, his dinner, his house, his moment to host a king and project strength and grace in front of the world. And somehow it was none of those things. Charles flew home. Trump is still in the building. And somewhere in there tonight, in a room full of his own people with his own name on everything, Donald Trump watched a 76-year-old British king walk out of his house with more of the room than he came in with. And Trump noticed. He noticed all day. He said so at dinner. I could not believe it. I could not believe it. That is every moment from that dinner. Every single one of them. Hope this one was worth your time because there was genuinely a lot to get through tonight. Glad you stayed through the whole thing.